Thank you for inviting me along tonight. And as you were saying, Stephen, we're going to learn about a very unusual fish. And I suppose the first question we've got to ask is, what is a seahorse? So many people are confused by this species, but I hope by the time we've actually finished the talk, we'll understand it. It is pretty remarkable, and how it manages to survive in the ocean, I'll never know sometimes. So, like I say, the short answer is it's a fish. It's a true fish, but it is literally like no other. I mean, if you see that picture there, very unfish-like in its appearance, just the colours alone. I mean, sometimes they are this colour in our British waters. Sometimes they're bright yellow. Most of the time they tend to be a greyish colour or brown, but we'll find out a bit more about their colour change in a minute. Now, for those that like the taxonomy side of it, this is where they fall into the taxon with Kingdom Animalia. It's the last three really that are more interest to us. The genus is actually Hippocampus, and the species name is either Gutulatus, Hippocampus, ingens, depending whichever species. But most people tend to go by the common names, but the problem with the common names, like with the spiny seahorse, Hippocampus gutulatus, officially, because of a mistake that was made when they were protected, they're actually called long-snouted seahorse, and it was a mistake. Somebody in Natural England, when they were putting the details through for them to be legally protected, put the name long-snouted instead of spiny, and unfortunately we can't change it now. So although the common name we use is spiny seahorse and short-snouted seahorse. So if you look at the Greek words, sin meaning fused and naphis meaning jaw, it is like a fused jaw, and we'll see in a minute exactly how that jaw and the mouth works. And there are so many different species in the group. Interestingly, if you look at the last part where it says about the genus Hippocampus, it translates into hippo, meaning horse, and caterpillar, campus, that means either monster or caterpillar in Greek. Now, the Victorians actually thought that seahorses were insects. They didn't think they were fish at all. So we've got all this background of confusion right before we even get started. Now, depending on who you're talking to, there's between 45 and 65 different species. We actually use a classification system done by Sarah Lowry from Project Seahorse, and she says roughly about 45, maybe 50 different species. But there's another gentleman, sadly not with us any longer, called Rudy Cuter, and Rudy thought there were over 120 different species. Now, both of their work has been peer-reviewed in different parts of the world, and both have credence. So I tend to fall between the two, but Sarah's classification system is the one that I tend to follow more than anything else. Now, size of the seahorses, they literally range from about 2.5 centimeters right up to, with Hippocampus ingens, the Pacific seahorse, up to 30 centimeters. But we had a massive surprise in 2015, and for the naturalists amongst us, when we're doing our field work, we're always getting people either over-exaggerating or under-exaggerating size, etc., etc. Now, the seahorse that was found in 2015 was actually 34 centimeters from the very top of its head to the end of its tail. Now, that is a staggering size, and it came from a fisherman, and I thought, oh no, is this a fisherman exaggerating? But it actually wasn't. He showed me a photograph of that animal against a bass motor, so we know its exact size. Interestingly, he went on to find another one at 30 centimeters, another at 28, and another at 26 centimeters. And in the last few years in my research work at Studland Bay, I've been finding them at about 20 and 22 centimeters. So those are animals that are obviously much older, live for a long time, and you can see by the posture of them, the body size, etc., that they are quite some age. And through the research work that I've been doing, I know that seahorses will live to a minimum of 12 years. These bigger ones must be up nearer 15, 20 years at least. So they're a long-lived species if they're left unmolested. Now, there's quite a few different species, as I said, out there, and seahorses all basically have this common shape with the horse's head, the tail of a monkey, etc. But when you start to look at them, like in a collage of pictures like this, you can see they're actually quite different depending on the habitat they live in. The whitey on the left there, in amongst sponges, Lichsteini on soft corals. So they're all I can just tell you a quick interesting story about Spinosomus there. That picture was taken in Cambodia, and I did some work over there, and we were looking for the seahorses, couldn't find any. The seabed had been completely trawled out by the local fishermen. But what we started to find is seahorses attached to urchins. Now, seahorses are supposed to be territorial, stay in one place, etc., etc. And these urchins were moving around. So it started to beg the question, what was happening with them? And we worked out that actually they were opportunists. So instead of pairing with another seahorse, they would wait for one to come by and take the opportunity. They didn't have territories. So they are adapting to what mankind's doing to them. Long term, it'd be interesting to see whether it's a good adaptation or a bad adaptation. But you can see very clearly they're quite different in their looks. Now, they do have gills like ordinary fish, but the interesting thing is that the gill is completely sealed except for two tiny holes at the very top. You can imagine an old-fashioned set of fire bellows, and it pumps in and out very much like that do. If you see in the next picture, these are the two siphons at the very top of the gills. Now, these siphons are very much like cuttlefish siphons. They create a huge jet of water coming out of them, and they need to do that with the eating that they do. Now, the eyes are absolutely fascinating, and we've been working with various researchers over the years over this, and they can see in full colour, except when they go into deeper water, and like us, their color disappears. Red is the first color to disappear, and so everything starts to be grays and blacks. But interesting, they can also see in the ultraviolet as well. Now, a lot more research needs to go on about this, but it's interesting that they have extra rods and cones in their eyes that we don't have, or we don't expect them as a fish species to actually have. And we're hoping that this research work will continue for a few years to discover more about it. Now, the other amazing thing about the eyes is they have a tint to them. Now, I wear sunglasses quite a lot when the sun's out, but the seahorses naturally have a tint in their eye. Now, for seahorses that tend to live in seagrass meadows, in amongst algae and stuff like that, they have a green tint to them. Seahorses that live in coral reefs tend to have a blue tint, and it's all designed so that they can define prey and predators in amongst the coral or the seagrass wherever they're living. It gives them much more definition. This is a beautiful seahorse. This is from Australia. I particularly like this one, and I particularly like it because of the banding around this snout. Excuse me, just got to take a drink. Now, if you imagine like the zebras, they have their body shape when they're in a herd broken up because they're all black and white in color. It's very much like that with the seahorses. They extend their neck, they extend their heads quite a long way out when they're searching for their food. And by having this banding around the snout, it actually breaks up the outline of the snout, and any prey that they're going towards don't actually realize it's a snout with a mouth on the end of it. And the mouth is literally right on the very end. If you look at the seahorse from end on, it's like a perfect circle. You have this tube, and it's perfectly designed so that they can eat tiny shrimp, and they can suck them in from quite a long way away. So the shrimp gets sucked into the mouth through the snout, little bits get expelled out through the gills, but then it goes down into their digestive tube, because they don't have a stomach. So again, like a lot of species, like a lot of other species, they're very, very different. Everything about a seahorse seems to be a little bit different. So instead of having food that just sits there in the stomach, gets digested, etc., it literally slowly moves through the digestive tract and comes out the other end. And interestingly, when you get the food wrong in captivity, particularly the small shrimp that they feed on, you can actually watch the shrimp just swim away after they've expelled them from the other end. So you've got to get the food quite right for them. The other incredible thing about seahorses is this prehensile tail. It can hang on into the most extreme conditions. I've been underwater sometimes, and I've been rocking side to side with the movement of the current, with the waves and things like that. And the seahorses hold on, and they're literally banging from side to side like that, but they don't get broken away unless the actual plant, like in this particular picture, pair of spiny seahorses holding on to a piece of weed. Now, as long as that weed is healthy and solid, it won't break and they won't move away from it. You'll see on the next picture how tightly they can hold on onto the seagrass there. And the tail is absolutely amazing. But when you look at it in profile, it's actually square. The rest of the body is like a pentangle, not pentangle, a five-sided shape, but the tail is actually square. Now, seahorses, particularly spiny seahorses, can grow and absorb the cirri, the spines on their body. Now, these spines are fantastic, particularly for younger seahorses, because as they move through different habitats into different areas, they look like a piece of weed. They hide away. They blend in so well that anything that wants to eat them can't actually see them. But as they get older, more settled in their environment, and they're more confident in their ability just to sit still and hide away, they absorb the spines in them. Interestingly, here in the UK, the short-snouted seahorse very seldom has spines on it, whereas the short-snouted seahorse in Spain, France, and all the other areas has lots of spines on them, and it's directly down to the type of habitat that they actually live in. Now, this picture's interesting. You'd think it was all the same species, but the two seahorses on the left-hand side, they're actually spiny seahorses. And as I was just saying a minute ago, the seahorses in the Mediterranean actually grow hair. And the one on the right-hand side, it's actually a short-snouted seahorse. We wouldn't see that seahorse in the UK with those sort of spines on it. And again, it's about habitat, about hiding away. Quite interesting. I set up a few years ago with a friend of mine in Spain a organization called the Seahorse Alliance, and it's a loose group of seahorse researchers and surveyors that just share ideas and thoughts about our research work. And we were chatting about this the other day, about why here in the UK we don't have spiny short-snouted seahorses and they do in the Mediterranean. We will find out entirely why eventually, but it'll take time. Now, seahorses can change colour. There's two different ways of changing colour. One is an emotional change. It happens instantly, whether they're doing courtship or if they're threatened. If they're threatened, they go really dark. If they're nervous or stressed, they go dark. If they're doing courtship displays, they can actually do what this seahorse has done. Now, the seahorse in the background is actually the same species as seahorse in the front, but he, within seconds, changed to pure white, except for the head and the keel on the front of the body. He actually has gone to pure white, whereas just minutes before he had jet black, like the seahorse at the back there. So it's an instant, rapid response for emotion. But they also have a base color as well. Now, in this picture, there's actually two seahorses, and I'll just highlight them for you. These are Hippocampus cuda. Now, they've matched the color of the detritus that they're, this is natural detritus, it's not man-made, that they're laying in. And they've also followed the posture of the detritus as well. So they are highly adaptable in no matter what they do, whether it's color, movement, shape, etc. Now, the famous thing about seahorses is the male's ability to get pregnant. They are literally the only male animal in the animal kingdom to have a true pregnancy. And it is a true pregnancy. It's not a surrogacy. The male actually has a courtship display with the female every single morning. Now, if he's given birth during the night, she will, through an ovipositor, put new eggs inside his brood pouch. Once they're inside the brood pouch, that's her role gone. She drops down to the seabed, moves away, doesn't want to know until the next morning. He, on the other hand, actually starts to tumble in a very controlled way to the seabed, and he's wiggling, constantly wiggling all the time, And what this is doing is separating the eggs into the lining of the pouch, the placenta, and at the same time, he's fertilizing them. Now, once they're embedded into that lining, they'll receive nutrition, oxygen, blood, everything that they need. But as a throwback to their original fish origins, they have a rudimentary yolk sac as well. So sometimes if a young seahorse, a fry, comes out too early, you'll see a little bit of yolk sac still on it. But this is great if you're captive breeding because they still have food inside them. Now, the males can be pregnant for up to 28 days. On the smaller seahorses, it can be 10 to 15 days. The bigger seahorses, the longer the time, and up to 28 days. And on average, they'll give birth to about 1,500 babies or fry each time. Now, again, the smaller the seahorse, the less babies. The bigger the seahorse, like the big bellied seahorse from Australia, can have up to 3,000-4,000 babies in any one go, but the average is about 1,500. Now, this is after contractions that can actually last up to 12 hours. And in the very final moments, you'll see the male wiggling, he'll be pumping his tail up to his body, and suddenly the opening of the brood pouch opens and the babies pop out. Unfortunately, I don't have any film footage of that, but I will try to get some sometime. Now, on average, the babies are between 6 and 8 millimeters in size, no matter how big the parents are. So even those tiny seahorses at 2.5 centimeters have babies that are about 6 millimeters. The very big seahorses, like our spiny seahorses, still have them about 8 millimeters. The difference is that with the bigger seahorses, their capacity to have more babies is bigger. With the smaller seahorses, their capacity is less. And out of every 1,000, maybe 2,000 in the wild that are born, unfortunately, only 1 or 2 will survive to maturity. Now, at 6 to 8 millimeters, they're this really handy bite-sized bit of food, and unfortunately, everything wants to eat them. And somebody once said to me, well, what's their role in the food chain? Well, this is it. They produce lots of babies because lots of babies will be eaten. But as adults, they eat lots of plankton and small fish. So that's their part in the role. Interesting, this particular picture, this particular baby, was the first spiny seahorse ever born in captivity that I bred myself, that actually survived to maturity, and we had about 6 generations of babies from him. Now, unfortunately, the males, I think sometimes they're not very bright because within 24 to 48 hours, they're pregnant again. And this particular shows one of the males at Studland Bay. And you can see by the slight darkening of the brood pouch there, that's the eyes of the babies inside the brood pouch. And this particular male would have been giving birth 2 to 3 days later after this picture had been taken. Now, the other amazing thing about seahorses is their skeleton. They have almost like a double skeleton. They have an internal and an external skeleton. The external skeleton is covered by a layer of skin because seahorses don't have scales. They have skin, very much like eels and species like that. But it's really cleverly constructed. Now, for the artists amongst you, anybody that draws a seahorse in the S shape, they can't do that. They physically cannot turn their tail back into an S shape. So please don't draw them like that. The skeleton is actually made up of these amazing triangular plates, and they are held together by ligaments. And there are thousands. I've never counted how many there are in any particular seahorse, but there are literally thousands of them that make up the skeleton of the seahorse. Unfortunately, it's their downfall as well, because when they dry out, when they die, and when they're hunted in their millions for the curio and the illegal medicine trades, they dry out in a solid shape. And traditionally, when they were taken for the medicine trade, somebody would go down to the local market. They would look for a very large, light-coloured seahorse that was dead straight because the fishers used to straighten them out, and then they would grind them up and make them into powder for all sorts of cure. But unfortunately, there is no scientific evidence, well, not unfortunately, I mean, fortunately, there is no scientific evidence at all to prove that anything from the seahorse cures anything at all. It's just a myth, and it's all based around the fact that it's the male that gives birth. They're yet another aphrodisiac, and unfortunately, about 150 million a year had taken. Well, there were. I mean, there's less than that now because they can't find 150 million a year. And strangely, although the traditional medicine trade was used a lot, particularly by the Chinese, Peru, we found out, is actually another massive exporter of seahorses. And the biggest Chinatown outside of China is actually in Peru. And also in Peruvian indigenous medicine, as in the Aztecs and Incas and people like that, they used to use seahorses in the same way that the Chinese do. But again, no scientific evidence. So it's this myth creation that's actually killing the seahorses in the wild. So seahorse distribution, where the blue lines are there, are roughly what we know at the present time where seahorses occupy. And I say roughly, it was only a couple of years ago I proposed that seahorses were all around the North Sea, and I was poo-pooed for it because people said, oh, far too cold, you know, can't get seahorses in the North Sea. Well, we'd proven that they were in British waters anyway, and we started working with the Danish Natural History Museum, and within no time at all we were getting seahorse sightings coming in off Denmark, Norway, Sweden, etc. So we know they're all the way around the North Sea. But interestingly, I had this theory that they were off Nova Scotia, and again people said not a chance, too cold, nobody's ever seen them. And yet, lo and behold, they are off Nova Scotia. We don't know what sort of numbers, and we don't know if it's just one or two that drift up on the currents up there, but we do know that they're actually there. Now, here in the UK, this short-snouted is mainly where these blue lines are. Now, I say mainly, they could actually be right around the whole coast. And personally, I strongly feel they are. But because we don't have the evidence, we can't say definitively that they're actually there. But we do know they occupy where these blue lines are. We run the World Seahorse database, and we analyze the data through that. So the spiny seahorse is where these orangey red marks are. And again, I would say that they're actually in other areas as well. We've just started doing work in Ireland, and you can see how evenly they're spread around the Irish coastline. Now, I think genuinely they are literally right around the Irish coastline. So it's the great thing about seahorses. We've still got lots to learn about them. Now, just coming a bit more local to where I am based in Devon, we have both species of seahorse. Now, as a rough guide, and it's a very rough guide, the spiny seahorse really should be called a seagrass seahorse, and the short-snouted seahorse lives everywhere else. It doesn't actually like seagrass as much as the spiny seahorse does. So in Torbay, you've got a mixture of sightings here. Where the seagrass is, it's spiny. Where there's not seagrass, it's short-snouted. Now, if you widen this picture out, you'll see they're spread quite a long way down. Now, again, as I was saying just a minute ago, just because there are no sightings in the gaps in between these sightings doesn't mean they're not there. It just means we've never had the record code, so we can't concretely say, yes, seahorse are there. We all work with various species, and we all have this problem of species distribution. And it's only when you get a definitive record that people will actually believe you. I mean, it took me from 1994 to 2008 to prove to people that we actually had seahorses here in the UK. Now, interestingly, seahorses spend a lot of time actually in brackish and fresh water. Now, if you look at the Salcombe estuary, that's predominantly salt water, right up to Kingsbridge, all the way down from Salcombe there. But on the left-hand side of the picture, that's the Dart estuary. Now, where it goes up to the top, where that pink area is at the top, that's Dittisham. Now, Dittisham is at the extreme end of the brackish water, and we know that the seahorses go beyond that occasionally. We've even had records in the Tamar River where seahorses have been in pure fresh water. Now, going back to the gills that they have, inside the gills, they have this little cluster of gills that look like a bunch of grapes. And that adaptation, that difference to having normal gills to other fish, allows them to actually enter into freshwater for periods of time. In the Nysen Lagoon off South Africa, it regularly becomes flash flooded, and whereas at one moment it's actually saltwater, the next minute it could be freshwater, and the seahorses thrive in there. Now, the World Seahorse Database started off in 1994 as the British Seahorse Survey, and we set up the database, and we've got over 3,000 sightings on there, and it literally now covers 54 different countries. It's the biggest and continuous running database of its kind in the world. We've started doing projects in other countries, particularly in Malta, and we have colleagues through the Seahorse Alliance I was talking about just now. They're in other countries that send our data, send their data into us. Now, we all know about conserving species. We all know about, through our different disciplines and our distant species that we work with, and this conservation circle is very typical of what we all have to do. We need the education. You could start at any point on this circle. You need to study them, you need to protect where they live, you need to do captive breeding if they're at such a parlous state in the wild that they need recovering. They need legal protection. Then everything combines together. So if you look at this is a conservation map for seahorses, starting with the surveys at the top that we do. And we have, under my license, because seahorses being protected, under my license, I have a number of surveyors in Selseybill, in Weymouth Harbour, in Studland, in Torbay. They're all over the place, and they're all looking out for seahorses all the time. And if you look at the cross lines there, I mean, you need to have the surveys to get the protection, legal and physical. You need to do the surveys for reintroductions. You have to do the captive breeding for the reintroductions to rebuild the population. So you're getting the idea, you know, you've got to build the knowledge. The captive breeding helps to build the knowledge. So you have to put all these things in place to actually conserve seahorses in the wild. Now, as I said just now, we managed to get seahorses recognised as a British species and protected on the 6th of April 2008. It was a hard job. So many people kept saying to us, no, seahorses are an occasional visitor, they're not an indigenous species. And we needed to prove every life stage of the seahorses within the UK, and Studland Bay allowed us to do that. We managed to see fry, we managed to see pregnant males, we managed to see females and males setting up territories. We saw the courtship display. We could follow individual animals to see when they were pregnant, when they got gave birth, when they got pregnant again. So it finally gave us that final bit in the puzzle that we needed. And on the 6th of April, we did manage to get them protected under Schedule 5, Section 9. Now, it's been hard work to protect them, but finally, people are starting to take notice, which is fantastic. Now, habitat is equally as important to the animals themselves. And I'm going to hopefully show you this video in a little while. A lot of our work is actually looking at how we can protect where the seahorses are and the habitat they're living in. One piece we did a few years ago, I took the government to a judicial review because they were just rubber stamping licenses for oil exploration in Poole Bay. And when my solicitor started to delve into this, she said, this is illegal. They can't do this because the sites that they were looking at were known winter seahorse sites. And so we took this judicial review and, touch wood, we had won it. And if I'd known what was involved, I might not have done it again, but we did win it. And so now the law has changed. So if anybody is actually exploring for oil in this country, they have to make the publication that they're going to do this much more obvious to people, to give people a chance to give the evidence and to say, no, there's a certain species live there, you can't explore for oil there. So we changed the law, which is fantastic news. So you've got to ask yourself, do you want to have this, a pristine edge of a seagrass bed, or do you want this, where the seagrass is all gone? As you can see, the two seahorses there had nowhere to go. Or do you want this, dead seahorses collected for the curio trade, the illegal trade, etc.? Or do you want this? This particular seahorse is one of the early ones we photographed, and this is actually photographed in the wild in Studland Bay. Beautiful young female, sub-adult, stunning, absolutely stunning. So you're going to ask yourself the question on the conservation, can you make a difference? And without a doubt, all of us are making a difference in our conservation work. The BNA is a real driving force for what we're actually doing. And there are conservation groups all over trying to work together and actually make a difference. But it does take all those things we were talking about just now: education, research, habitat protection, enforcing legal protection, studying them in the wild and captivity, captive breeding, conservation through cultivation. We might even one day have to consider breeding seahorses so that the Chinese and the other groups don't take them from the wild. It's a bit like breeding salmon, trout and stuff like that. Personally, I don't like that idea, but what do we do when they're taking over 150 million per annum? There are huge areas now where seahorses don't exist in the world. And we've got to do this conservation to stop that happening. So going back to our original question, what is a seahorse? It is a fish, and it is literally like no other fish you've ever seen before. Now, I'm hoping in a second, the video I'm going to play you will actually work. So if you can't hear it, Roger, can you put or Roger or Stephen, could you put your video on and tell me if you can't hear it? So here we go.
No, sorry, Neil, not getting any sound.
Sorry, did you say you can't hear it?
No sound from here.
No sound?
I can't hear any sound.
Oh, yeah, I had this problem the other day. I don't know why it's doing this. I'm so sorry. I hope that I can hear at my end, but if I turn the volume down on me, I can, bear with me 1 second. Right, can you tell me if this works?
No, unfortunately, Neil, still not getting any sound.
Okay, right. I'll try and talk over it. Right. Here we go. I apologize that we had this problem the other night. I don't know why. For some reason on Zoom it doesn't like us to play videos with sound. It'll do the visuals. So basically what Sarah is talking about there is about Studland Bay and about how amazing it is. And this is a young naturalist whose parents actually help us out on the beach, Gabriel and his brother Josh, and they actually go looking for seahorses for us. They spend a huge amount of time just snorkeling, and they've got so good at actually spotting the seahorses now, they can usually tell us where they are, which is brilliant. So this is a bit of video of the seagrass at Studland Bay, and I'm just explaining on the video there about seagrass, how it's a true plant. It has a root, it has a rhizome mat underneath it. But one of the problems is all the boats in the background that you see in that picture there, actually digging up. Now I'm just explaining on this bit of the video about there are seahorses, cuttlefish, crabs, all sorts of creatures live in this virtual underwater rainforest. You can see the boats in the background there. The seagrass is remarkable because it has these different levels. But one of the problems that Gabriel's explaining here is that the brown seaweed that gets dug up actually does cause some problems in the bay, but it also, ironically, can be good for the seahorses because, as you can see, they go in amongst it and they hide really well. So it's not all bad news in that particular. This is a pair of seahorses, the male at the back there, and they're starting their courtship display. I'm just explaining here about the rhizome mat. So they had this very thick mat, but unfortunately the chains of the anchors actually tear through the mat. And what it does, it creates a fragmented habitat, a fragmented ecosystem. And Gabriel in this one is just talking about how there used to be seagrass at the bottom of where that buoy was put in, and there's no seagrass there anymore, and there are no seahorses. He used to go and spot a seahorse actually living underneath that red buoy. But everybody wants to go to Studland Bay, and we've had to try and find a way of actually stopping the problems. This is Claire. She actually is the founder of Chocococo, and she's a boater and a conservationist and local businesswoman, and she's explaining how anywhere up to 350 to 450 boats per day will be in Studland Bay at any one time. And so we've had to look at different methods to protect the bay, to try and find a system that will actually stop the boats from tearing up the seabed, but still allow the boats to be there. This is a quiet day in Studland, this picture. Sometimes it looks like a car park full of boats, to be honest. I don't personally see the appeal, but people seem to like it, and they literally go from the marina in Poole Harbour out to here. It's only about half an hour's cruising, and that's it. Now, these chains actually just scour the seabed. They cause so many problems, and conventional chains are the ones that cause problems because they lay on the seabed when the tide's down. So we've put these eco moorings in. Now, they are actually attached. You can see it says a seabed below it, the seagrass below it. Now, Sarah on this picture is actually illustrating how this anchor, it's called a helical screw, goes right down into the seabed, up as far as the very top there where the shackle is. So the whole of it, except for that top bit, is actually underneath the seabed. And then attached to that, you'll see in a second, you've got this elasticated road. It's like a big elastic band, basically, and it goes from that helical screw up to the surface to a mooring buoy. And those orange floats help to keep it upright, but it also, even if it laid onto the seabed, it wouldn't cut through the seagrass in the same way that a traditional swing mooring would do. We've been sponsored by Boat Folk on this, and they are continuing to help us on the whole project. And we put 10 in originally just to start the conversation, but we've just managed to generate £66,000, and we're going to put the next lot of moorings in, hopefully over the next month or so. So in total, there should be about 40 eco moorings into the site. Now, we've gone for a license for 100 in total in the first phase, which we will hope will all be in by next year, if not the year after. But we've also set up the Studland Bay Marine Partnership. Now, this has been crucial to what we're doing because it involves Crown Estates, National Trust, Boat Folk Marina Group, ourselves, Southampton University, and a couple of other universities. We've all got together and formed this Studland Bay Marine Partnership. And the partnership is allowing everybody to work together and actually protect the site for the future. We're hopefully in January next year, we'll be making it a CIC, so it'll be a not-for-profit organisation. At the moment, all the fundraising for the eco moorings is coming through the Seahorse Trust, but it will be, like I say, not-for-profit, and then we will hand over all the eco moorings to the CIC at that point. But look at this stunning seagrass, absolutely amazing. It is an incredible environment. Now, this piece of footage here is of 3 seahorses, 2 males and a female, and it's the first time we'd ever recorded aggression between 2 males actually fighting. They were snapping at each other. And little Gabriel and Claire are just explaining how much they love the site and how it's worth protecting it. And that is a quiet day in Studland Bay with those boats on there. Literally, sometimes you cannot move for boats in the water. And we've even last year had to stop some of the survey dives we did because it got so dangerous under the water that we just couldn't carry on. So I will stop the talk there. Bear with me. And I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for listening to all that. And I'm really happy to answer any questions if anybody got any questions.